what's up guys? We are on our modern contemporary monster house. I'm not sure what else to call it. As you can see, I've got a mountain of poplar trim all around me here. I've been slicing and dicing on a project over here that's coming out pretty well. Wanted to show you some details in this video. For a lot of you guys who do this professionally, you know that details can take absolutely forever, especially those very simple contemporary details. I've got this long foyer here, and we've got nickel gap tongue and groove that's going on the ceiling, and you'll notice about every 8 feet it changes directions, and it's all cut at a 45-degree angle. I've actually been kind of dreading this aspect of the project for months because I thought I was going to have to fit every piece perfectly tight to the wall and not use any scribe molding. Thankfully, I was able to talk the architectural designer into using this. So I'm partway through now. I've got a lot of tips and tricks that I've used on this installation that I want to show you. So first off, I want to address the question I get asked a lot whenever I use the term nickel gap. This is actually what we call nickel gap. It's different from shiplap. The profile is a little bit different. Some of you might remember a couple summers ago, I actually did a house with 2 miles of nickel gap just down the street here. So this is the same profile, same material, except it's stain grade and it's in poplar. The biggest difference with nickel gap is it's got a tongue and groove, and then you'll notice on the front here, you've got a gap that's a little bit thicker than a nickel, and that's why they call it nickel gap. It's a little bit different from shiplap. Shiplap actually has a rabbet on the ends and it overlaps, which requires you to face nail it. With nickel gap, when you're nailing this on the wall, you just nail through the tongue, and then whenever you put your next piece on, it covers up your nail hole so you have no exposed fasteners. So before these big projects, I always submit a quote or a bid for the job with what it's going to cost. And it's a big deal for me to try to do this work in as cost-effective way as possible. And sometimes the simplest details can add a ton of time to the project. So actually about a week ago, we were on site and one of the designers wanted to take all of this nickel gap and pre-stain it. Reason being then is if it expanded or contracted, we didn't want to have basically raw wood showing through on here. So I actually nixed that idea. And the reason was we've actually got this house completely acclimated. The wood's been in here for a while. And if you look at the way this goes together, it's only going to, at most, expand or contract probably a 32nd. And that's just going to create a shadow line. We're not going to have raw wood, in my opinion. So we didn't do that. That saved me a ton of time. Otherwise, we would have had to have had the painter come in, pre-stain all these grooves, and it just would have made the whole process a lot more difficult. So whenever I have to bid these jobs and I've got a ton of cutting, a ton of pieces to install, the first question I ask myself is, am I going to be able to batch cut these pieces? Meaning, am I going to be able to set up a stop block and just cut a bunch of pieces at once to the same length and install them? Because that's going to greatly affect my labor. If I have to measure and cut every single piece, it's going to take a lot longer. And if I have to measure and cut every single piece and have to tweak some cuts, make recuts and things like that, then it's really going to take a lot longer from a labor perspective. So when I was looking at this print, I knew that this had the potential to take a ton of time because all of these pieces are intersecting with the wall at a 45-degree angle. So long story short, we were having a conversation a week ago going over the details for this ceiling, and I try to be respectful, but sometimes I have to push back a little bit whenever I realize that I can save a lot of money with a simple detail. So this is a piece of scribe molding, very basic, about a strong 1/8 inch thick, and this guy right here saved thousands of dollars of labor just on this area. The reason is it allowed me to have the ability to batch cut these pieces and not have it be crucial if I'm not getting everything nice and tight, so I can cut really fast and then I'll go back through and install a piece of scribe molding later. If we actually come over here, you'll notice in this area, I've already got the Scribe mold installed and it looks fantastic. So by not having to perfectly measure and cut every single piece, it saved tons and tons of hours of labor. So batch cutting is gonna save a ton of money, ton of labor, right? Well, how in the world are we gonna batch cut these pieces if they're running diagonally at a 45-degree angle? It's actually really simple. Let me show you how that works. I was actually able to cut basically a whole section at a time like this without coming back up to measure anything. To get started batch cutting, all we need is one measurement to start off with. So we're gonna pretend a little bit that I'm starting here, that this isn't already up. We're gonna start at the corner and work our way out. So I've got my starting piece right here. Now we can start batch cutting. So we'll get started by pre-cutting a 45 on one end. Now we'll take our piece that we're starting with and we're gonna put it in line here on one side. If I'm not blocking that, so that's in line. And the nice thing is we've got forgiveness because we're gonna use our piece of Scribe molding, and I'm gonna make a line right there. Now I can come over here on this side and we'll batch cut the second piece. Okay, so now our second piece is done. Now it's time for our third piece. I don't even need to move the saw. I'll just flip the board over. Get that one started. Now I'll grab my second piece. Do the same thing again. Line it up right there. We'll come over here to the long point and then the short point on our next board. Mark that again. Cut that. One more. Flip. Line it up. Mark it. There we go. So here we go then. I've got my starting piece here, piece number 2, piece number 3, and piece number 4. Everything's lined up. Again, thankfully we will be able to use the piece of Scribe molding over the end here. So if we're not absolutely perfect, it's no big deal. But this is absolutely crucial if you want to get something like this done efficiently, to be able to batch cut, number one, but then also to be able to have that measure of forgiveness by using a piece of Scribe molding. I've got nothing against trying to fit something like this perfectly tight. I can do that if somebody wants to pay for it, but we just have to educate the client, the designer, the builder, and let them know that, hey, this detail, if we want to do it that way, it's gonna cost a lot more. So each of these boxes has about 25 pieces. Whenever I price out a job like this, I've learned to count the number of pieces that it's gonna take, and I know approximately how long it's gonna take me to install, to cut, measure, install a piece onto the ceiling if I can batch cut and there's some degree of flexibility with the measurement. Usually I can count on about 10 minutes per piece, just as a general rule. Now, if you take an install like this and I have to precisely cut every single piece, measure it and cut it, it's gonna double the labor. So it's not a matter of, can a client like this afford to pay me to do that? Of course they can. It's more of a question of, can we take that labor and put it into another detail so they're getting more for their money? So whenever I brought up the option of saying, hey, we could create a very simple Scribe molding that's gonna go with the profile that we're installing, it's gonna look great, and it's gonna save a lot of money, they're gonna usually go for that because they would rather get more bang for their buck than just spend an exorbitant amount of money on one detail just so they don't have to have a piece of scribe molding. So you guys saw how fast I cut this. Now imagine this compared to going up on the scaffolding, pulling out my tape measure, measuring each piece at a diagonal, which is difficult to get a precise measurement, down, cut, up, or you have to have a helper involved, takes a ton of time. So usually whenever I have details like this that I have to bid out that are just extremely intricate, what ends up happening is I put a number on it, a dollar number, and it's gonna seem super high to the builder, super high to the homeowner. But the reality is with that number, I'm not making probably even a profit on it. Sometimes I'm losing money and the homeowner thinks they're paying a ridiculous amount of money. So whenever we value engineer these details, we can meet in the middle where I can install it in a reasonable amount of time, make a profit, and the homeowner gets the best bang for their buck. Hey guys, so we're actually a couple days forward in the future right now, and you'll notice that the beams are no longer here. A series of events transpired that caused the beams to be removed. I'll cover that more towards the end of the video, but there was one more thing I forgot to mention before when we shot this the other day. This scribe molding, there were a variety of reasons I pitched this, that we wanted this, and I forgot to mention a key point why you want this scribe molding is because it gives you a perfectly straight edge for the painter to cut his paint to. If you don't have that, you have all these little notches in the nickel gap, and whenever it's stain grade, it's really hard for the painter to cut a line and get a nice looking transition between the wall and the nickel gap. So putting that scribe molding on there gives you a nice straight line to cut to. All right, so enough talking about how to efficiently do this. Let's get to cutting some wood. These are some beams, and these are breaking up the sections where the direction changes on this shiplap. We've got this broken up into sections. You'll notice over here, I've got a lot of forgiveness underneath these beams, so that was another thing that helped me be able to production cut all these pieces really quickly. So you'll notice here in our foyer area, it's got our diagonal nickel gap noted, and then there are 4 beams, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then down here, they've got the specs on what I'm supposed to do for those beams. So we've got a 1/4 inch rabbet detail on the bottom here, and the beam is assembled flush across the bottom. So I'll just be taking a piece of 3/4 by 3/4 blocking and putting it on here, and that'll allow me to nail this centerpiece up into the side beams. So the reason we have this rabbet detail on our beams is because it actually matches the baseboard. This is our baseboard, and it's got a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch dado on here. So if we come down here and look at the print, you'll see up here I've got my baseboard profile with the dado detail, and then down here on my beam detail, it's actually a rabbet, but it still looks like that same dado that I have on my baseboard. Getting set up to make these beams, I'll need to make a rabbet on one edge of the beam. To do that, I use this little fence that'll attach to the DeWalt compact router. I keep this on my van all the time. I actually use it quite often. And then I've just got a mortising bit chucked into the router. I'll take a gauge block, and I want a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch rabbet. So I'll set my offset there at a 1/4 inch, and then it's pretty handy because you can just flip it over and you can set your bit depth at a 1/4 inch as well. So I've got some pieces pre-cut a little bit longer than what I know I'm gonna need. And whenever I select these, I need to make sure that I'm accounting for any defects in the material. So I'm grabbing it, I'm looking at it. If I've got any chunks out of any of the edges or anything, I want that to be hidden. And also a lot of times you'll have some planar chatter on one side of the board. It's gonna not sand out quite as easy. So I wanna make sure I'm putting that side towards the inside of the beam. So this is my good side. So I'm gonna flip it over. This is gonna be my inside, and I'll be running the rabbet detail on the inside here. So I've got these positioned with the inside, ugly side facing up. I can grab my router and go ahead and put this rabbet on the edge. So whenever you're gonna be taking a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch rabbet out, you wanna do that with a climb cut. Otherwise, you're gonna risk taking a chunk of material out. So I want the bit to be going clockwise into the material. That way the bit's pulling the wood in and it's not gonna rip a chunk off. So we'll go clockwise with the bit down and then we'll push it back and that'll give us a really good cut. So to get the measurements for our side beams, there's a lot of different ways we could get these cut. I just grabbed my stair gauges here and I'm gonna use those because a lot of times the drywall is tapered and it's got different things going on, and this is gonna make it really easy to get the length and the angle of the cut perfect all in one shot. So to do that, I'll just take this up here, we'll slide it into place, and then you just kind of loosen these, push it in really firmly, and tighten them up, and then that'll conform to the angle of the drywall. We'll go ahead and do that on both sides. I think this one's gonna be good. Nope. Go ahead and move that as well. Again, pushing nice and hard. Looks good there. Looks good here, so I can use this to cut my side pieces now. So while I was up there, I didn't show it, but I always try to mark an R or an L on either side to keep straight which side is left and right so I don't get it flipped around whenever I'm doing this. So we'll just align the top of the gauge, which is the ceiling, and I can go ahead and mark that, and I'll carefully go down here to the other end, trying to make sure I don't move it. And we'll mark that as well. So I want to match up my shadow line from my blade onto the pencil mark, and you'll also see I've got my two pieces stacked on top of each other. I'm going to cut these at the same time and just be careful not to move them. So that looked pretty good. Now I'm going to be careful to squeeze this together and slide it down. Cut. It's probably getting a little long. All right, so next I want to match the angle of the saw to that pencil line, but before I cut these, I want to just feel down there and make sure that those are still flush. And they are, so I'll go ahead and cut this. Now I can tell you that unfortunately one of these has a bow in it, and I think they're actually going the opposite directions because I wasn't paying attention to that. I can figure that out by flipping this over and putting them together, and actually they're decently straight. Nothing too bad there. So we should be fine whenever we put these up on the ceilings. These are about 7 foot long, so I'll probably still have to scribe them to the ceiling. This is one of those things where do as I say, not as I do comes into play. You'll notice we just don't have a lot of room in here with all this trim. Our table saw ended up right here, and there's a very expensive patio door behind it, which is not a good idea. So I've actually been opening up this glass door whenever I want to rip stuff. You don't want to have glass like this behind your table saw. So we'll get this moved here soon, but for now, I just kind of have to have it right here. Even when I'm doing paint grade work, it's still very important to sand stuff. 5mm stroke on this ETS 155 makes quick work on poplar. Now, if we get up close here, you'll notice that we've got some very sharp edges with some splintering going on here. That's not great if you want a really good paint job. You just want to take a piece of sandpaper, 120 grit, and just soften those edges real quick. Doesn't take long, but makes all the difference in the world for the final finished product. The next thing we're going to do is put some blocking on the inside of these sides of the beam. And the reason for that is we want this bottom piece to come across perfectly flush whenever we install that. To do this, we'll just use a 3/4 by 3/4 nailer piece that we'll nail on here. I do like to glue this in. It's probably not necessary, but it just ensures that things aren't going to move around. Maybe we won't get some paint cracks and stuff like that. So just a little bit of glue, smooth it off with my finger. I want to make sure that I'm in 1 inch on both ends so that I don't run into my blocking that I've got up on the wall. And then I just create a little gauge block here that I'll use to get this in the perfect position. So we'll start this off right there. And I'll just keep moving down the line. And what this gauge block is going to do is it's ensuring that the thickness of my bottom board, which will go right here, is just going to be perfect. So that's all I'm doing. Pro tip, before you start nailing this on, make sure you've got 1¼ inch nails in your nail gun. I can't count how many times I've grabbed my 18 gauge nailer and had 1.5 inch nails in it, and I've nailed the piece on only to flip it over and realizes that I've got tiny little nails sticking out everywhere. So you only have to do that a couple times until you learn. All right, guys, so you always hope you won't have to scribe it, but you end up always having to scribe it. Got these up there. There was kind of a hump in the ceiling. So the biggest key is you want to get it in position, tack it in place, and make so that your ends are level across. That way, whenever you scribe both sides, you're taking the exact same amount off of both sides, and it goes up the same on both sides and stays level. So I'm just using my easy scribe. Gonna just do a pencil line on here, and probably rip this off on the table saw. Just go along there. Like so. Not a big deal. Go to the other side. Alrighty. Okay, so I've got my scribe cut, and then I went ahead and softened that top edge. I like to do that whenever I'm mating a painted material up to a stained material so I don't have that super sharp edge. So now we'll just kind of go in at an angle here. Hopefully everything looks good. Nail it in the center. Then I'm just going to put a nail on both ends. I'll come around and do the same thing on the other side as well. Trying not to damage drywall too much. slinging stuff around here. Now I just need to get the measurement for my bottom piece here. I'm going to take my laser. I'll try and remember to link this in the notes. It's the Leica Dado D2. I got 83 7/8 strong. So a little tip, whenever you're fitting parts of, basically the center part of a beam in, I like to ease the edges real nice. That way it'll slip up into place a lot easier than if you leave sharp edges. So at this point, we're ready to install this. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put a little bit of glue down both sides just so everything stays connected really well after I nail it in place. Because it is paint grade, that glue line is gonna want to crack way up in that rabbet. You won't really see it, but the glue will probably help combat that cracking a little bit. So just gonna smooth that out. We'll go ahead and nail this in place. Okay, up we go. Hopefully I got my length right. Ooh, that's a little tight. Our drywall tapers down, I think, right there. So I'm gonna switch ends and try and put this end in first. It might go in a little bit easier, yep. So basically what was happening right there is this corner bead was tilted out, so it wasn't allowing it to go in. So that looks really good. Don't even need to clamp it together. You can just squeeze it together by hand, make sure it's pushed all the way up. And I'll add a couple 15 gauge just to nail it home completely. Nailing here on that blocking that I had will squeeze this together. Out of nails. So guys, we're all done with this beam. It finishes off really nice and flat all the way across the bottom here. This dado that I have here, or rabbet, it serves a couple purposes. One, it cohesively integrates with the rest of the trim package. Here I've got the base board. We have this detail on a few different parts of the trim package, but also if I wanted to make this beam flush all the way around, I'm gonna deal with a hairline crack here. So by creating this rabbet or this dado look here, it removes that issue of expansion and contraction, and it's just a nice looking feature on the beam. So basically we shot this video a couple days ago, and I had these beams installed. They looked fantastic. I was really happy with them. Was eating supper that night, got a text message basically saying, hey, those were supposed to be stain grade beams, and I had used finger jointed poplar. I don't know how I could have made that mistake. I immediately doubted myself and figured I screwed up. And so the first thing I did the next morning, I came in here and I ripped them out and was planning on putting stain grade beams in. Homeowner ended up wanting a different look anyways. But if we go over to the print over here, I was telling cameraman Aaron about my situation the next day, and he said, well, the print did say they were supposed to be painted. So if you look down here, we've got our beam detail right here, and you'll see that it says painted materials. So I ended up being off the hook on that. Wasn't my screw up after all, still gonna get paid for doing it, but it's just one of those things that happens in construction. So I'm happy with how it looks now. I think it looks great either way, but a little bit of drama on this one. So hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I'm gonna keep rocking and rolling. I've got a lot of this Scribe molding to trim out around this room, but it's looking absolutely fantastic. Let me know if you've got any questions in the comments. We'll have a lot more videos coming from this house, so stay tuned.